Hello, everyone, and welcome to Changes to the Head Start Performance Standards, What This Means for Our Community. This webinar was developed by ELD staff in response to your request at our meeting together back in December. And this is Gwen Bachtel, the ELD Program Specialist and Preschool Promise Program Coordinator. Before we get to further introductions, I just want to inform you of a few details. This meeting is being recorded. Just 30 seconds ago when I started speaking, I hit the record button. And it's being recorded so that you can refer back to it in the future, and also so that hubs and Head Starts that are not able to join us today can use this webinar in their community at a later date. If you need technical assistance during the webinar, please use the chat box or call Sue Parrish's number. It is at the top of the agenda that Shauna Rodriguez sent, and we can also post that in the chat box in just a moment. After the webinar, the ELD will be available to you until 1 o'clock as a collective group. We're going to all hang out in this room together and kind of act as a help desk in case you have questions out in your community that needs a quick response. So please contact one of us using the numbers provided in the email from Shauna. And by contacting one of us, you will have access to all of us. So before I start, I just wanted to make sure if anybody had any questions on those instructions at this time. Great. I want to thank all of you. It seems like all of you are on mute if you're not choosing to speak to the whole group. I appreciate that. And I just want to move on to some introductions here from the ELD. But because we have a lot, I assume, checking from the attendees that have logged in, we have a lot of attendees out in the field. And so what we are requesting is that instead of us doing introductions by phone for all of you, that if you could please send a chat box text message to everyone on the webinar. That would be great so that we know you're here with us and we welcome all of you. So, like I said, this is Gwen Bachtel, and with me today in this room.
Hello, this is Shauna Rodriguez. I'm the Head Start Collaboration Director for the state of Oregon, and I work in the Early Learning Division.
And
I'm Sue Parrish. I'm the Early Learning Hub Partnerships Manager here at the Early Learning Division.
And then I think we have another ELD team member joining us remotely.
Hi, this is Michael Connor calling in from Portland.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. We hope that this webinar is timely, informative, and relevant to the collaborative work that you are doing within your communities. And without any further ado, Shauna, I will turn it over to you to facilitate the next part of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Also, for those of you who received a forwarded invite, if you did not receive the agenda directly from me as well as the accompanying handout, that was included on the calendar invite. So you should be able to go into the calendar and be able to open those items if you haven't already or don't have them with you. So today we are really hoping to give you guys an overview of the Head Start program performance standards and how they may be impacting your local programs. As part of this, though, we really need to lay some groundwork to make sure that folks are familiar with the design of Head Start and how some of those pieces fit together and how the performance standards fit into that structure. So Head Start is a federal to local program, which means that all the grants that we have in the state of Oregon have applied for their grants at a federal level, were approved by the Federal Office of Head Start, and receive their funds directly from that office. We have a regional office in Seattle who works more closely with oversight with those programs. It was the most recent reauthorization of Head Start was in 2007 with Improving Head Start for School Readiness Act, and there was new performance standards that were released in September of 2016. The School Readiness Act, the 2007 Head Start Act, as they refer to it, is the superseding legislation. So if new performance standards come out, they need to be aligned with the act, and if a new act comes out in 2 weeks, that act would then supersede the performance standards. So it is complex for local programs because they do need to be referring back to both documents in order to be pulling out the most recent information about what they need to adhere to. So things like the credentials for staff and things like that would be changed perhaps in the act, and that would affect what is and vary from what might be in the performance standards. With the additional piece, sorry,
I just want to stop because, Shauna, I apologize. I have given you permission to share your screen, but I do not see it coming up on mine. So I just wanted to make sure, do a quick check that others can see Shauna's screen.
This is Dana. I'm not able to see it.
So
Yes, I'm sharing.
I know it does say that she's sharing it here, so I apologize. I just wanted to just make sure that we were all seeing the same thing. So just give us one moment. Where are you here? One moment, sorry.
What?
Hi, Molly. Oh, we saw Molly for a minute. That was exciting. He's back. Woo! They're muted, but they're
Sorry,
excited.
we're still trying to make sure that we can share this. For some reason, it's not picking up Shauna's screen.
Now we can see Gwen's screen.
You can see my screen, even though it says it's paused?
Yes, we can see the webinar invite. And you just got an email from Shauna.
Thanks, that's what I want.
Which includes the PowerPoint. Doesn't that work well?
It's all coming together like a mighty river.
Up to the one that says OPK and statute.
So I think we are back on track.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right. So one of the unique things in the state of Oregon is that in our statute, the pieces that we follow actually mirror the Head Start performance standards. So as you see on the screen, Oregon Revised Statute 329.160 says that the OPK program shall be operated in coordination with a federal Head Start program in order to avoid duplication of services and as to ensure maximum use of resources. And then if you go down to the statute 329.175, it talks about the funds should be established and maintain the OPK programs, and that they shall coordinate with other federal Head Start programs to ensure efficient delivery of services. Oh, and yeah, so the next slide talks about, and number 2, programs shall serve eligible children and provide all.
We're not seeing the slide, Shauna. We're just seeing the message.
You have to
All right, we have Sue stepping in for our.
I'm my own person, damn it.
Now we have the appointment. Julie Sanders, would you mind muting your connection? I know that you're shouting at us all the way from Northeast Oregon, but.
Michael, can you see it now?
We just see the appointment. Now we see it.
All right, golly.
Woohoo! The mighty river.
Wonderful. So, all right. So now you can see the slides I'm referring to. As you can see on number 2, programs will serve the eligible children and provide all components as specified in the federal Head Start performance standards. And it goes on to talk about how they will coordinate for services. So this is a very unique model in the state of Oregon that they actually mirror the performance standards exactly, which adds additional pressure when things like the performance standards are having shifts and changes in what they say. It also shifts and changes what's being said at the state level, and we also need to work to keep up that relationship. For the relationship between the federal funding and the state funding, the money provided by the state is accepted as non-federal share, which is a requirement of Head Start programs to provide 20% of their operating costs as non-federal share, so coming from sources that are not federal to pay for them. Because of this unique way that it's counted in as well, it means that the majority of the oversight for programs that are federally funded is also conducted including their Oregon slots that are paid for by the Oregon government, the ELD. So because of this, we have a partnership for Oregon Head Start guiding roles and responsibilities. And this document is what we've worked with Region 10 from the Office of Head Start to outline how we all work together to monitor and support these programs. As part of this, there is a difference for programs receiving state-only funds, that there's slight variations in how they have their oversight. So their oversight is primarily provided by the Early Learning Division and by staff in our division to support them and to track them and try to mirror what's done at the federal level on a larger scale for the programs, the other programs in the state. This also means there's potential gaps between the systems. Things such as with federal dollars, you're allowed to do conversions from Head Start slots to early Head Start slots. You're also able to reduce your enrollment based on certain administrations. There's also something called designation renewal, where you have to show that you are eligible to be renewed for your grant based on some criteria federally in the 5-year grant cycle, and that's something that still needs to be written into rule more formally for the Oregon-only programs. There are ways, such as with the PIR, the Program Information Report, that we've been able to utilize federal resources to be able to gather data on the state programs and to have them be more integrated. There are times where we're able to integrate them into learning opportunities offered by federal programs, but that is some constant work. So you'll notice with your programs that are funded by state-only funds, they have some different obstacles in the work they do than we do with our jointly funded programs and the resources that are available to them. So it's an important thing to kind of understand with that relationship. And with having the federal system oversee the funding that's going to the Oregon programs that have joint funding, there's also the piece that when we have performance standards or the act shifts, there's shifts there, but there's also shifts in political leadership. And currently there is not a director of the Office of Head Start in DC has not been politically appointed. Currently, it's a career individual who is interim serving in that position until somebody is selected. And when somebody is selected, that often changes some priorities. My position is actually overseen by that and can have the priorities for my role shifted with the new administration. There's also shifts potentially in things like being able to reduce the number of children you serve in order to increase quality, was something that under the previous administration was encouraged, but is currently something that's not able to be supported because of the variance with political pieces in DC that do affect our local programs. So that's an important perspective to also have with that. So this update to the Head Start program performance standards is the first comprehensive revision since 1975. There have been updates to sections and pieces and portions. The acts have added information and guidance as well, but this is the first time there's been a full comprehensive revision. Because of this, the Head Start Act from 2007 that we noted is actually aligned with the performance standards. So they are in alignment. For the past 9 years, programs have had to look at different places to receive guidance on which was a superseding regulation for what they were doing at their local programs. Most of the items in the performance standards went into effect on November 7th, 2016, which is some time ago, but there's things that come into effect as late as 2021. So there's some variance around how that is happening. With this, I'm going to give you guys just a quick overview of the implementation timelines. It actually touches on some pieces that we will not go into very much depth on. The first is that Early Head Start. So for August 1st, 2017, so in a few weeks, which is one reason why we made sure we had this webinar now for all of you so that you could have this information before those things came into effect. The home-based services for Early Head Start have specific guidance around service duration. Curricula for center-based and family childcare programs is being implemented at that point in time. Assessment and curriculum for home-based programs. The alignment with a quality rating and improvement system is something that is required by the standards which goes into effect August 1st, and the vast majority of our programs are already in alignment with that and participating in that program. There's guidance around data systems and the regulations they need to have on data systems, which we have some questions out from programs that we're still gathering clarification for them around that. The background check procedures, which we'll be talking about today, coaching strategies, which we'll be talking about today, the management program data, which kind of goes along with the data systems that we'll be talking about today as well. The ones that come into next August are the Early Head Start center-based service duration, the qualifications for both child development specialists and home visitor staff come into play next August as well. Some of the other shifts that we will not be going into depth on are the performance standards really take a step towards addressing suspension and prohibiting expulsion. You'll see there's a link that's highlighted on here that goes to a policy memo that came out from the Office of Head Start and the Administration for Children and Families that really kind of drills down and looks at that more. They definitely have found that there's nationwide disparity against children of color who are being suspended and expelled, and it's also very indicative in data that children who are not able to be maintained don't gain what they need to be able to be successful in school. So it's important to have plans to get them back involved. Your local programs will tell you that this is something that suspension and expulsion is something they haven't done. Like it's been a practice, and other guidance has been from Head Start to transition children to other placements and do those type of pieces to best support them. And so this is kind of just a new highlighting of it, and also adding additional requirements around engaging in mental health consultants and ensuring that the parents are part of the process and community resources are used. It also talks more about temporary suspension. And so if it is absolutely necessary for a child to be removed for a temporary period of time as agreed upon by parents, the mental health consultant, staff, et cetera, that there's a plan to bring the child back into the classroom. So instead of just transitioning children to lower level of services, there needs to be a plan to actually bring those children back into full-time services with the Head Start program. There's also additional focus on attendance and addressing chronic absenteeism, which your local program can tell you probably how they're doing that. It involves like more contact with the parents in those cases and supporting that, so they can share more about that in your local area. There's also some definitions. They did a really great job this time of outlining definitions, but there's some slight shifts in how things were defined. And so there's things like that that you can look in that whole section, see slight differences and variations from what we've had previously. So things that are consistent, and it is a little confusing because Head Start has a lot of different faces and ways of doing things, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the consistent things are the Parent Policy Council, that we use parents to govern the programs. There's a huge family engagement component and importance of the family as the child's first teachers. We have very individualized services and utilized curriculum. There's access to mental health consultants. We do child assessment. We do, sorry, that just skipped on me. There we go. We do child assessment. There's developmental and health screenings. We have stuff around child health and nutrition, both with food and during the school day and with additional supports for the children and families and curriculum around that. There is home visiting, and then the classroom ratios, such as for Early Head Start, it has to be 1-to-4 ratio up to the age of 3, which differs from a lot of state regulations around ratios. So those things are fairly consistent. So things that can really vary based on your local program is really the design of the program, whether they are home-based or center-based, whether they have full day, part day, whether they have a full year, part year, when their start and end dates are for that year. In the previous performance standards, and Michael will be going more into the new requirements around duration, but previously there was actually a table that you could look at that said if you're going to have 2 classroom days a week, that you would then have X number of home visits during a period of time. So that's something that that used to be kind of the design, and that's going to be moving towards more towards locally designed options And there has been in the past where they just need to look at what the needs of the community are and making sure they're best serving the needs of their community. The number of home visits provided based on model can vary and based on program as well. Things like the family service support staff can have varying amounts of home visits at times that they go into the homes based on what the program's been able to designate. There's additional stuff with the number for early Head Start home visits, and based on your model that varies as well. So the ones that we're going to focus on today, the shifts and changes, are the requirements around coaching, the expanded requirements on background checks, and the shift to extended duration, as well as the requirement around curriculum for parents. We chose these to highlight. A lot of them are coming into effect in August, and a lot of them are ones that are larger in picture to potentially be impacting communities in different ways, both positively and with challenges. And so we felt those were the important ones for us to focus on today to kind of help you guys steer in that direction. If you guys have questions, we're definitely going to answer them. We set aside 10 minutes towards the end to go into that. We do have a lot of material to cover, so we're going to go ahead and go into requirements around coaching with Michael. But go ahead and make note of questions or put them in the chat box so we can make sure we get to them during the question portion.
And Michael, I believe that you have control. I think you were the one who was moving some of the slides around, so I think you can go right ahead. And
Actually, no, that wasn't me. So I just sent a request for you to let me show my screen. Here we go.
we're good?
And yep, I think so. Well, that's not it. One moment, please. There we go.
Is it?
Well, nice to see everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I've been asked to talk about three things, and Shauna is a task master of all. So I've got a solid 7 minutes to do this. So here we go. The emphasis on coaching in Head Start comes from a couple of different places. So the guiding questions that I have for you are, why are we doing coaching, and what do the standards require? The need for coaching, this is a little bit of a complicated graph, but this is basically different kinds of teacher interactions that we see in Head Start using the class tool. Not all programs use the class tool, and there are other ways to think about teacher interactions and what's important in a classroom, but three big categories here: emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. The good news is that in general, teachers in Head Start do pretty well at providing a caring space for kiddos to come in and feel like they're important, and that the teachers are interested in what they're thinking about and feeling about. And also, our classrooms tend to be busy, organized, productive spaces. So those are a couple of strengths. The challenge that we have is around what's called instructional support. And these are the interactions that teachers have with kiddos to prompt their language and prompt their thinking. So getting them intellectually prepared for school and for life is probably the area that teachers struggle with the most. And this graph really hasn't changed over the last 5-10 years. So we've done a lot of professional development with teachers, but we're not changing the outcomes. And so we have within Head Start, there's a model of how this can change. We're all familiar with the outcomes that we want kids to have getting ready for kindergarten and for life. Those are everything from gross motor and fine motor to social emotional skills to being able to persist at tasks and avoid distraction and things like that, language and all kinds of groovy stuff. And we're also familiar then with what good teaching looks like. I think it's providing that emotional foundation, making sure that there's ambitious instruction for kiddos, and that the interactions that teachers have with kids are likely to push the kids' thinking. At the program level, organizations need to provide stable, secure facilities. They need to make sure that the business is running. They need to identify a mission and values and goals for the program in terms of quality improvement. So coaching is really the bridge between program leadership and good teaching. And so when these things are lined up, we're likely to have kiddos who are more ready to be more ready for kindergarten and for life. We have a challenging problem here, which is how do we improve teacher interactions with kids, and that's why the emphasis on coaching. We see that teachers get a lot of professional development, so-called, mostly through workshops, and the research is that's not that effective. So coaching has an emphasis because it tends to be effective because it's ongoing and it's embedded in the job that teachers are doing. So coaching, I'm just kind of skipping a couple things here, but the general coaching requirement says that programs by August 1st must have a system of evidence-based professional development, and we take that as a shortcut for coaching, and that it needs to be ongoing. So we distinguish between training, which are the essential skills and knowledge you need to do your job, and coaching, or job-embedded professional development, which is support along the way to help you help your kiddos get ready for school, to improve your own practice in alignment with the program goals. This system has to be in place by August 1st. It's not a one-off, so you can't say I've been coached, I can check that off my list. It's something that's ongoing. And in practice-based coaching, it's a cycle. So there's collaborative goal setting, and then there's focused observations and reflection and feedback that then lead into more collaborative goal setting and planning. So that's the top level overview, but you can see why Head Starts all over the state are really working on thinking about what their coaching system is, not just because it's required, but because we know that coaching gives us the best chance to improve teacher-child interactions and get kiddos ready for kindergarten. I want to give a moment to see if there are any clarifying questions about coaching that I can tackle in the couple minutes I have left. Practicing my teacher wait time. If you do have a question, you can pop it into the chat box. A couple things I'll mention is that for the first time, there are credentials identified in the performance standards of what a coach needs to have. They need to have at least a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, and they also need to have, I believe the phrase is training and experience in adult learning principles and in using data to inform their coaching. So the trainings that we're providing for coaches and the ongoing work that Gwen and others are doing with Chemeketa and other institutions to start to ramp up our professional development for coaches will address the fact that we want folks to be familiar with adult learning principles, because that can help overcome situations where adults are reluctant to participate or hesitant or anxious when you design your coaching interventions based on adult learning principles. Like, adults like to be in charge of the pace of their learning. They like to set their own goals. They need to be respected for their experience that they already have. These are crucial components of a coaching system, and without them, coaching systems are likely to fail. But using those adult principles can guide coaching interactions and interventions. Let's see, Gwen, I think, handled the question from Julie. Where to access, Carol Moore asked where to access base requirements for coaches. So that's written into the performance standards. Shauna's slide deck identified the number, 1302 something or other. But that's written into the performance standards, that the degree requirement and then the understanding of adult learning principles and expertise in using data. Thanks for that question, Carol. So hearing no more questions, I will turn it back over to the good folks at the Early Learning Division Salem until they cue me again.
Thank you so much, Michael. I don't actually have that performance standard thing listed, so make sure that we get that to everyone so that they know which performance standard that connects to that. So the next piece that we're going to talk about is the requirements.
Do a verification that people can see this.
Nope, not yet.
Nope. Okay.
So we're going to be talking about the requirements around the background checks next once we get the screens up. So as we're getting that figured out, I'll go ahead and help you guys get a little bit of framework for this. So as much as we just had the shifts occur with the Head Start program performance standards, there's also been reauthorization and shifts with the Child Care Development Block Grant and the Child Care Development Funds. So as part of that, they tried to bring them into alignment in regard to what was the requirement around background checks. Both of which became more stringent with this process. And so because the fact both systems are shifting, this will affect not only the Head Start programs in your community, but it might also have an effect on the child care programs in your community. So it's important for you guys to understand that there is an additional burden that is taking place, and there is some additional time challenges that might be a shift for folks. So as we go to the screens, we will definitely be able to go through exactly what pieces timing-wise will be occurring.
Still doesn't seem to be sharing my screen, even though I am now the presenter. So,
do you guys still see Michael's slide?
No, we see the 130290 slide.
Oh.
Oh, great. We were using my my
So
computer to test us, and it didn't do it quite right. That's perfect. So 1302. Perfect. Okay, so this is the full standard related to the background checks that goes into a little bit more depth about the program must ensure the newly hired employee, consultant, or contractor does not have unsupervised access to children until they complete the background check described in the other paragraph. But a lot of this stuff, like to take it to how it applies to our state, is best in the background check process and timeline that the Department of Education, ELD, has put out for everyone. So as part of this, there's an online paper background check that needs to be completed for the Central Background Registry, which is a step that's been typical in the past. And then at that point in time, there's a application that they receive that then returns a request for fingerprints for them to complete. So then the individual must go online to schedule a fingerprinting appointment with Fieldprint Fingerprinting Services. So this step is like part of the challenge. Previously, I know with Head Start, you only had to do the fingerprints if you were coming from out of state or had other specific requirements. So this is an additional expense, an additional time piece to be able to get this information back. With this, there's a $12.50 fee. That's in addition to the $35 fee to office that folks have to go through. Then once the fingerprints are transmitted electronically, they get a conditional enrollment, which is under number 7. So that conditional enrollment meets that initial piece with Head Start that you must have both checks according to Head Start, but as long as you've had one, you can begin to have access and begin your job, and then to have access and children both must be completed. And so then it looks like it'll be approximately 10 days for enrollment. So this means that if you do hire a new staff person, you have to allow this 10 to 16 business day window before they can have that unsupervised access to children, which is going to be a challenge and burden for some of our communities, as well as the access to the Fieldprint offices, depending especially on more rural areas. So it is something for all of us to be aware of and have continued supports around addressing that. They do note that there's a number of circumstances that can cause delays, so rejected or unreadable prints, and the results being difficult to review, because as part of the check too, you're also looking at the sex offender registry and child abuse registries and other pieces that are more in-depth than what was done previously. So this gives you some information on the next slide that the unsupervised contact with children is talking about who must be enrolled and who doesn't have to be enrolled. Start programs because some of their requirements to make sure that they had volunteers or certain individuals enrolled was consistent with what the requirements were from licensing and from the child care end of things. So as this goes into effect, it's also important for programs to look back at their own policies and standards and make sure that that's what in the new performance standards and what's in the new child care requirements for Oregon is what's reflected in their rules. So as you see in here, that volunteers counted in adult-child ratio must be required to be enrolled in the background registry. This does, as well as practicum student teachers, included in the ratio. But then if you look at the next page, it talks about volunteers not counted in adult-child ratio do not have to, will not have supervisor authority, will not be left alone with children, and so consequently, they don't have to be enrolled in the registry. So it's important to kind of have that understanding about you know, what contractors and what different pieces plays into this. There's additional guidance that Office of Head Start has also given out that we can provide if there's additional questions regarding this. So the compliance date for this, as we noted, is supposed to be, so Head Start was supposed to be September 30th, 2017, and then they have the option with CCDBG to be in alignment, that if the state asks for an extension, which can be granted for up to an additional year, that we have an additional year to meet that. And I don't have an update as to whether Oregon has requested and received that, but it was the intention that Oregon would ask for an additional year to allow us time to get this all aligned, because it will be necessary for everyone that currently works in the program to be gotten up to speed with meeting these requirements, which is a large burden that will take some time for us to get there. So currently, even though it's not fully in effect as of yet, individuals that are coming into employment or joining the registry are going through this more extensive process in order to have them up to par when it does go into effect. All right, and then that goes back to Michael on the extended duration requirements.
Great. That's great. And yeah, so I wanted to point out that in the previous discussion, there was a question about where the standards come from, and you all will get this slide deck, but here's the marker for where it is in the Head Start standards that talks about the training and professional development standards, including the coaching systems. 1309.92 for those scoring at home. All right, so many of you know that in the new Head Start performance standards, there's an emphasis on extending the duration that we work with kiddos in the classroom and in the care centers. These standards have different components for early Head Start and for Head Start, but they're similar. And I think for our purposes at this level, the big questions that I have is what's behind this move, and what will early Head Start need to do, and what will Head Start need to do, and what are the timelines. So that's kind of how I've organized the little work that I'm talking about. And to talk about what's behind the move, I prepared a little something for you all here, hoping that this is going to work. 36. One moment, please. I need to get to 36. It's going to be awesome, though, because these people really know what they're talking about. So 36. It's like you're doing this with me, isn't it? There we go. So my question is, make sure that you all can see this. Make sure that that's happening. Here we go. This is going to be great.
That the program structure section is foundational to how programs design their services. And as we all know by now, one of the biggest changes in the new performance standards and in Head Start's recent history is towards longest service hours.
I just want to make sure, is that volume okay for people? Anyone? Oh, no. Molly says no. Okay. So 1 second.
Could you tell us a little bit about the research that helped us decide to get to this position in the final rule?
Sure. Well, I mean, for starters, we have decades of research that tells us that the most critical years in a child's life really is the first 5 years, and that we have an opportunity with early education services to really impact their learning, their school readiness, and their health. And those benefits can really not just benefit children individually, but benefit society as a whole. On the other hand, we also have ample research that tells us that children from vulnerable backgrounds, children who are at high risk, start school already as much as a year behind. And so we really see early childhood education as an opportunity to close that school readiness gap. And the research has been mounting that demonstrates that children really need adequate time in early learning programs in order to see significant impact. So research with young children, research on full day pre-K, full day kindergarten, summer learning loss research, all of these different areas, and really on effective teaching and curricular practices really show us that teachers need more time in the classroom with children in order to reap the benefits of early childhood education.
So when we talk about duration, and we talk about now teachers having more time in the classroom to do rich learning experiences with children, can you give us a little bit of a comparison? Now we're talking about for our preschoolers over a program year being in 1,020 hours, and our early Head Start kids being in, I want to say 1,380. And how does that compare with what the final rule now will require to what our kids are currently getting?
Yeah, so many of our programs are already providing adequate learning time and really providing 1,020 hours or even more than 1,020 hours to preschool children or the 1,380 to infants and toddlers. But Head Start programs that are operating under our previous minimums are serving children for less than half the amount of time of that 1020. And of course, I'm just so happy about the early Head Start, and I think it's getting us back to what Congress originally intended. And could you speak to that a little bit? That's right. Research on continuity of care and the importance of continuity of care really for all children is really a long-standing literature, and we really know that continuity of care is so important for all children. But it's really, really important for the babies, for our infants and toddlers. And Congress recognized that and has always defined early Head Start as a continuous program. And so what we're really doing with that 1380 is just codifying what Congress has always intended and really just trying to make sure that kids get the continuity of care that they need.
Okay, so there's the background of why Head Start has moved to the longer duration, given that we know lots of good outcomes come when kids have adequate time in early learning situations to develop their brains and their hearts and their bodies. So as they mentioned, there's particular hour requirements for Head Start and for early Head Start, and I can show you quickly that there's a sorry, that's not what I wanted. There's a compliance table. So for early Head Start, by August 1st, they need to have, they must have, August 1st of this year, they must have 1,380 hours. And by August 1st of next year, Head Starts must have 1,020 hours. And you keep going by August 1st of 17, and so forth. So again, for this group, the details are less important than the general idea that many Head Starts are working on how to get their programs to longer duration. And I think for this group, it's important to point out that there are some implications and challenges for programs in your areas as they grapple with these duration requirements. One is that it's a different ballgame if you're used to working with kids for 3.5 hours and now they're going to be there for 6 or longer. You have to deal with things like nap time and staffing patterns. You also have some big facility challenges for programs. So if you've got two classes of kiddos operating in one classroom, and that's not going to work anymore, then you're faced with figuring out more facilities for your program. The costs are quite a bit higher. They're probably not double, but they're also probably not 1%. So Annie and some of the other directors, I'm sure, can speak offline about trying to figure out how much that's going to be, but it's significant financial and facilities challenge for program. And then, of course, budgets, as I just mentioned, how to budget for this. Some programs have experience with duration and how to budget for it, but others don't. In general, and I'm going to talk about this later, but figuring out what program model you have needs to be based on community needs. So when there's a gap between what your program can offer now and what the community is really asking for, that presents significant challenges for programs. Are there clarification questions that folks might have now about duration? Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Gwen and Shauna, but I want to give a moment if people have clarification questions. Seeing none, I'll
All right, so we did have one question that we're going to answer during the question period when we get to that part from the last discussion. So for the curriculum requirements around curriculum for parents, most of you know that Head Start has often offered parenting classes and opportunities to learn for parents in programs. This has been a consistent part of the heritage and history and way of engaging parents and including them as their child's first and most important teacher. The curriculum requirement for the performance standards is that it's saying now that you must have a research-based parenting curriculum. And there's like much more resources and deeper information we can give to you, including like a compendium that was created by the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. But the biggest piece is that this is now not looking at like one-stop shopping, that you have parents come to one parent night that discusses a topic and that's it. That it actually is looking at them having a curriculum that builds on and that engages, that includes parents and families. And this is something that is amazing. It'll be great for communities to have this piece expanded more, but it's challenging. It's challenging to have times that work for parents. It's challenging for them to come to multiple meetings, and that's something that our Head Start programs will be working on. And it does not require that this is offered by the Head Start program. It can be offered by community partners, which is why it's great if we can have conversations about what is available in your community and have an opportunity to look closer to make sure that it is a research-based parenting curriculum that does meet the requirements of the performance standards to be able to support the needs of Head Start meeting regulation, as well as providing these wonderful opportunities for folks. Yeah, Michael, you are controlling it. You just don't know you're controlling it. So that's why I'm jumping all over the place.
I'm so sorry.
That'll be a good part of the conversation for you guys to be having about what's available in your community around these curriculums, and if there's support needed from the ELD to help you guys look at if it meets the compendium and meets the requirements for the Head Start performance standards. All right, now it's over to you, Michael. Now you can move it all you want.
I'm so sorry, Shauna. Sorry about that. I'm just waiting for. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned before, under the new Head Start performance standards, there's an increased emphasis on community assessments. So the idea there is that programs really need to be looking closely at what are the needs in the community and how the community is changing as they design their programs. In fact, the first step in the grant writing process programs are asked to propose a service area. So think about geographically where you're going to serve, and then as programs do a community assessment, they're selecting the model that best works for the community that they're serving. So built right into the grants that programs are writing is an emphasis on community assessments. So programs are required to review and update their community assessments annually to show any changes. They do a big deep dive every 5 years or so, and then they're required annually to revisit it and see what kinds of changes have happened in the community. Some of the components that are specifically called out that programs need to look at are the increased availability of publicly funded pre-K in their area. So that could be your preschool promise, or it could be a school district who's decided to open up some pre-K classrooms, or maybe something really cool I don't even know about. So that's one of the things. And then they also have to assess how well the available offerings meet what parents really need. And that includes questions around duration. Programs are also, as part of their annual community assessment update, are instructed to look at rates of homelessness. And the reason that has particular implications for Head Start is that by performance standard, the Head Starts are I was going to say, children who are homeless, families who have children who are homeless, are automatically eligible for Head Start. So figuring out what the situation is with homelessness is one of the requirements of the community assessment annual update. And then last question that programs must address is, are there changes in demographics, or is the job situation changing? Is patterns of housing changing, and so forth? So there's a number of elements that are spelled out in the performance standards that programs really need to dive into as they tackle their annual community assessment update. So I've got some considerations that you might want to think about. Are there opportunities to share and compare data between Head Start programs and other community organizations? And now I don't see me anymore. Are there implications for how you could compare data or share data? And then I did a handy dandy screen here where you could think about how a community assessment can work at different scales. So if a program is serving the Ida B. Wells School District, they might do a community assessment that's based on that school district. But if they've got a site, at the Lucretia Mott Elementary School, they're also going to want to dig into what's happening in the Lucretia Mott Elementary School, as well as the whole Ida B. Wells School District. But they also might want to scale up at the level of the county to see what the Eleanor Roosevelt County looks like. So at each level, there are different kind of scales to look at in terms of the community, and they may intersect, the Head Starts may intersect with other community organizations or the hub as a whole, depending on what scale they're looking at. And with that, I will ask, are there any clarifying questions for me about community assessments?
There's one in the chat box for you asking if the assessment of publicly funded preschool is annually or every 5 years.
The requirement is that each year programs need to look to see about the increased availability of publicly funded pre-K. So, and you can imagine that 5 years is probably too long to ask that question. So every year they should be looking to see what else is available in the community, and that should that influence where I'm offering services or in what way I'm offering services. Great question. Thank you, Denise. Annie asked another question about what hubs do in terms of community assessments. Hubs do, as I understand it, complete community assessments, and that will be a great opportunity for Head Starts and community and hubs to get together and say, here's what we think is happening in our community. Here's what we think is happening in our community. And as I mentioned, what are the different scales that different agencies might be looking at? The hub region will undoubtedly be bigger than the Head Start service area. So there's a chance to compare and contrast what people think they know about what's going on in the community. Great question. Thank you, Annie. Seeing nothing else, I will jump off camera here. Chaka and I say goodbye, but we'll hang on for the rest of the thing, and we'll be present for the town hall afterwards. If you have follow-up questions, you can call my number. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. So we're actually moving into the portion where we are going to be answering questions. So I see that Brenda had just asked about the Head Start community assessments being public documents or needing to have a data sharing agreement. Information that's in those assessments may vary by program, so you need to talk to your local program to understand if it is any confidential information is in their assessment that may require the necessity of a data sharing agreement as per their needs to have data management policies and procedures. But there is a good chance in your community that the data they collect, they're sharing with their boards, and the board data is public information and it is public domain items for you to review and look at. I think that Annie brought up a really good point about our ability to kind of share and work together. If you remember, in December, we actually had a document that started talking about community assessment, and each of the two entities talking about both the hubs and the Head Start programs, for those that attended, that have Preschool Promise in their area, to start looking at what they already gather information on how they can be of support. And there's actually going to be a work group that's going to be coming out of working with Head Start. So I know David Mandel, we can get some folks from the hub to get involved to talk about how we can possibly work together on community assessment. So that's a great point for us to bring up and look at more closely. Another piece of the question that came up previously by Molly was related to teachers being licensed and fingerprinted and what they already do through TSPC. And this is actually a national piece that people are having questions about and having challenges around, because the fact that it is now more stringent for the child care process in most states and for the Head Start process than it is for the school process. So because it's more stringent, it currently necessitates duplication, which is very unfortunate. And I think that's something we can look at in our state to see what meet qualifications. The field print portion of our fingerprinting is necessary because it is linked to the national database and looks at things at a different level. So there's actually a lot of conversations that need to take place in order to see what the TSPC is willing to look at to possibly utilize some of what we utilize, and us possibly accepting some of what they have and doing that alignment. But that's a really great point, Molly, as something for us to keep in mind and look forward on, because that will be a challenge for programs that work with school districts. So are there any other questions that you guys would like to bring forward? I know we're getting short on time, but we can always have, if you have individual questions, there'll be time for that at the very end to call us and ask as well. Wonderful. Well, I think that you guys, we'll get to the slide that has our numbers, but we'll go ahead and let us move to doing, oh, sorry, I'm supposed to talk about the continuing the conversation for your community. So there's a handout that was part of the invite, which includes, which I had up on my computer, but as we all know, we can't use my computer. So we don't have the invite up.
No.
Okay, no problem. So on that document, it kind of gives you guys an outline of questions that you guys can discuss around the table to be able to learn a little bit more about each other and about where things are at. So the information that it kind of touches on is how these changes impact both your local Head Start as well as your community, as well as other impacts that weren't discussed in the webinar. As we touched on, there's a lot of areas that we didn't speak more about. Also to see about the preschool resources in your community and how they're impacted by these changes, as well as ways that you can look for support in your community around this and other community changes. And then it goes back to, again, talking about the memorandum of understanding that is required as part of the Head Start Act for everyone to have, for all Head Start programs to have if they have other publicly funded preschools in their area, which we've started that targeted conversation with areas that have preschool promise. So in that memorandum of understanding, to look at that and to look and see where you're at in the process, if there needs to be any updates as a result to these or other changes in your programs and community, and then setting up kind of a plan for you guys to talk about those community assessments, and then what steps you might need in order to follow up for this discussion, and when you'll meet again. And finally, if there are ways that ELD can support this work. So I think that Molly's example is a good example of ways that the ELD can really start conversations with TSPC around the requirements they have for background checks and the ones that are required by Child Care and Head Start, and see how we can start to talk together. So things like that, we would love for you to actually share that with us, like discuss it in your meeting, but send us an email so we can actually like put those down so then we can look into and work out more. And there was a question Molly asked about sharing data with the hubs around developmental screens, which you might need to get a little bit more clarification around. Molly, do you want to clarify what you're speaking about that you guys need, what data you need? Okay, so she's welcome to call us and to clarify like what data she needs. And that might be a local conversation you guys have around the table right now about data that the hubs need that the Head Starts might be able to support them getting and how that will work. And just to clarify, we will be here, there's Sue, Gwen, and I will be in the same room for the next hour for you guys. So actually it's noon, not at 1. And you guys can call Michael as well. So all the phone numbers are up on the screen for you guys and should be also on the agenda. If you guys do have, as you're having the conversations around the table, we want to make sure we were available for you guys for those purposes. So I will turn it over to Sue.
Well, thank you so much to Michael and Shauna for sharing this information. Super, super helpful. And again, we're going to be here for the next hour. We're going to sit here and do our work and debrief a little bit together. So we encourage you all, as you're having your conversations, to get in touch with any questions you might have. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. And be in touch as you continue your conversations. Thanks.
Thanks. Have a great day.